let me be clear and let's get straight to the point. Pierre Poilievre misrepresents fact. In other words, bald-faced representations. In other words, out-and-out lies. Now, how can I say that? Well, it's very easy, and I'll explain why. Okay, I'm going to start first by making a construct with Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Carney said, I'm quoting Mr. d'Entremont here, Mr. Carney said he would be judged by the cost at the grocery store. Well, Canadians are judging him and they are not impressed. Since the Liberals came to power, food prices have risen 40%, said Mr. d'Entremont. We have heard it many times here today. It is deliberate and it is unacceptable. It is inhumane for a G7 country, said Mr. d'Entremont of Liberal policies. He said, we are a rich country, we are a food basket of a country. We can produce all the food for many people in the world and we can barely feed ourselves for some reason, end quote. That is how Mr. d'Entremont described the outrageous cost of living as the direct result of Mark Carney's Liberals. I'm very sad.
Yikes. So first and foremost, this is a CBC, obviously a CBC broadcast live. Poilievre takes questions for first time following multiple caucus departures. Talking about Chris Entremont. Now, obviously, Chris crossed the line and moved to the Liberal fold because he got tired of the misrepresentations, misinformation, and the lies. And it just caught up with his consciousness. And that's just where the reality sits. This is the reality. This is misinformation. It's trying to be portrayed in a different way to lead you in a different direction.
Saddened for the Nova Scotia families on whom Mr. Carney and Mr. d'Entremont are raising the price of groceries and homes, but that will not change our resolve to continue to fight for an affordable Canada, affordable budgets, and an affordable future.
You want an affordable this, that, and this? Why don't you put controls on rents, put controls on energy, and put controls on food? That's a good way to start controlling the affordability situation. But that's for another conversation because we got to balance things in a different way in order to do things like that to lift up the bottom. Not top down like the Conservatives always want to do. That doesn't work. Now we're going to move to Bill Kelly. Bill Kelly's podcast. He used to work, I believe, for CHCH TV, and here's Bill Kelly. Now he's fact-checking that very same video we just watched. So let's see what Bill has to say here.
Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussion in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. Over the last couple of podcasts, we've been talking a little bit about the crossing of the floor. Of course, Chris d'Entremont, the former Conservative MP who crossed the floor and now has become part of the Liberal caucus. Another one who we're told was rumored to be crossing and ended up resigning altogether. Some people are telling us it was because of pressures going on. The thing we mentioned, though, and I think this was in our last podcast, how radio silence from Pierre Poilievre ever since all this started. He walked out of the House when all this was going on, of course, did not comment about it, has not commented about the crossing of the floor or any of the other thing that's going on, especially about some of the stories about a lot of dissent within the Conservative caucus. Well, today, as a matter of fact, just moments ago, Mr. Poilievre finally, like the groundhog on February the 2nd, stuck his head out of the ground and has decided to respond. And by the way, and I use that word respond rather loosely because all he really did, typical Poilievre fashion, was start coming out here and mouthing off about his perception about the budget and the same talking points that he used last year during the election campaign, which Canadians obviously had dismissed. But it was the same old Poilievre with the same old guy with a chip on his shoulder, armed to the teeth, of course, with misconceptions and untruths. Well, we can call them lies. What the hell? About the sorts of things that are going on. So I don't want to play the whole half hour. I wouldn't subject anybody to that. But the last couple of minutes of it, when they opened it up to questions and answers, which you knew what was going to happen as soon as that. Okay, let's say first of all, Poilievre has this incredible disdain for the media because they actually quote him and they record him so that he can't say I didn't say that. They play it back, so he's pissed off to begin with. So there was one question that was about the floor crossing. Now keep in mind, just to set the context here, Poilievre's whole idea of coming out finally to meet to the public and talk was basically to get his talking points about, slam Carney and slam the Liberals, yada, 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 right? He didn't want to talk about the floor crossings, but it came up during the question period anyway. So I want to play that clip and give you some context as to what's going on. So let's bring that up now.
You lost 2 MPs the week of the budget. One cited your leadership as a reason for leaving. I just want to put Carney and the Liberals to the side here, just as you personally.
Of course you do.
Does this say anything about your leadership? Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead and be the only leader in the country that's fighting for an affordable Canada, where our people who work hard can afford a home and food. That is my agenda. And I will just quote Mr. D'Entremont when he speaks about Mark Carney. He says,
Here's the problem. The conservative policies are neoliberalism, economic policies. Milton Friedman and Hayek were the economists that promoted this. You started seeing it coming into play back when Reagan came into power, Thatcher came into power. And these policies of balanced budgets and no deficit spending has gone a long way to create the issue and problem we're in right now. And let's be fair, many governments have also participated in that. It's a trend. Instead of using modern macroeconomic theory and doing things in a different way, which has taken a long time to get hold for people to understand, because what they're teaching is wrong, even from the universities. What they're teaching is what to think and not how to think. And the real world and what works and what doesn't work is different. And this is why we've got the affordability situation here and now. It's not exclusive to Canada. It's a problem in the United States, in Europe, and the world for the most part, except for maybe China. And interestingly enough, if you look at China, they've been operating at a 5.5% inflation rate, which, you can't do that in North America or Europe or anywhere else. And this is why China, there's a hybrid type of economic policy situation there that has allowed them to leapfrog immensely and become a world power, or second world power, second largest economy in the world. So now we're going to pivot again and switch, because I think this is important to understand. So what's really happening at the BBC, and it's suffering a far-right attack. And you have to understand, we see that in Canada as well with defund the CBC. You see that in the U.S., where oligarchs are now controlling all the major media outlets and newspapers. So the narrative is being manipulated. You, the people, are being manipulated, and this is why it's important we have to recognize this.
Is there a coup going on at the BBC, as many of its staff have suggested this week? My answer is, of course there is. When journalists are toppled for minor errors, while those responsible for truth are silenced, that's not accountability, that's about seeking control. And this desire for control is not accidental. It's part of a wider, far-right project to delegitimize truth itself. As historian Tim Snyder said in his book On Tyranny, truth is always the first casualty.
And I want to include another fact here. Tim Snyder was a professor in the United States, and recently, because he's worried for his safety, his security, he's moved to Canada, and he's a professor at the University of Toronto.
Of authoritarianism. Fascism doesn't begin with violence, it begins with lies. And to achieve that, first of all, you discredit truth-making institutions, the press, academia, and civil society. And look at the USA. That's exactly what Trump has been doing and now he's turning on the UK. The aim is to replace facts with opinion, and then opinion with propaganda. The object is simple. If no one ends up believing anything, power can say anything. As Hannah Arendt, the notable historian and commentator on fascism, put it in 1973, the moment we no longer have a free press, anything can happen. A people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its mind. And with such a people, you can then do what you please. And what she was talking about is not. It's the roadmap of every authoritarian regime in history. And that is why the BBC is being targeted. The BBC, for all its faults, and let's be clear, it's got them, remains one of the most trusted media organisations on earth. Destroying that trust is the ultimate prize of those who want a world without accountability. After all, when the BBC fails, who replaces it? Private media oligarchs want to do so. They want to deliver corporate control of what we hear. They want to create partisan echo chambers. And that's the point. They want truth itself to be privatised. And who gains from this? Let's be clear, this assault on the BBC is all about money and power. When truth is unstable, the rich get richer, and democracy withers. The economic and political power structure of the wealthy benefits most from the confusion that this attack on the BBC is trying to create. Because when the public can't agree on facts, the elite act unseen in the shadows of secrecy, finance, and captured institutions. And the consequence is obvious. Democracy corrodes. If public debate lacks shared facts, it becomes a shouting match. Reasoned argument collapses. Spectacle wins. We start to vote for those who sound strong, but not for those who sound right.
So that's an important statement there. And you end up voting for who sounds strong instead of who is right, in the hope that you're just fight and flight mode. They've triggered your emotions. This is part of the divide and conquer strategy. Create the problem. They create the fix for the problem. And then when they're in power and things aren't going the way they had stated they're supposed to go, they just deny, deny, deny. And we've seen that. British Empire was based upon that. You also have to remember the Americans in Iran, the Shah. They sent an economic hitman, I forget his name was Parker or whatever, to destabilize the currency. You've seen that in the Boston Tea Party, when the British brought bale loads of fraudulent money to destabilize the greenback and create the Civil War in the United States. We've seen that when the USSR was dissolved, and the CIS, Commonwealth Independent States, was created with Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. And Putin ended up becoming the power source and created a structure of oligarchs. And you see that in the United States now under Trump, where all these oligarchs own the media outlets, and they're manipulated by Trump because it's pay to play, and tariffs are a club to wield to everyone in the world to pay to play with the U.S. You do a trade deal with the U.S., you're still going to get a tariff. You cannot win a zero-sum game when the zero-sum negotiator is the President of the United States micromanaging the economy. Nothing can be done without his approval. Anything that does, you get fired. So understand, zero-sum means he has to win and somebody else has to lose. And that's the way he operates. He doesn't understand cause and effect, even though the tariffs are actually a tax on the American people. Mind you, a lot of the corporations, because of Trump's bullying, have eaten a lot of the cost of the tariffs, but it's starting to trickle down more and more into the American economy, and we're going to see that reflected in this next video. So we're moving to the next video, and we're going to see a guy by the name of Daniel Dale, who's doing the fact-checking. He worked as a journalist in Canada. And he was fact-checking in Canada, and he's fact-checking here in the United States. So take it away, gentlemen.
White House officials are strategizing on how President Trump should address the issue of affordability. Remember, back when he was a candidate, Trump repeatedly vowed to make America affordable again. But now, as president, he's repeatedly dismissed affordability as a problem, insisting that the economy is great. Sources tell CNN that Trump's advisors are telling him that is a bad idea, that he should not downplay the fact that Americans feel squeezed by rising prices. They've even discussed having him travel the country to give economy-focused speeches. So what do the numbers and the data actually show? CNN's Daniel Dale is here with a fact check. Daniel, let's go overall prices first. Here is what President Trump.
If you look at affordability, which they campaigned on, they lied because they talked about, oh, prices are up. No, prices are down under the Trump administration, and they're down substantially. The reason I don't want to talk about affordability is because everybody knows that it's far less expensive under Trump than it was under Sleepy Joe Biden, and the prices are way down.
Daniel, what do the numbers?
None of that is true, Boris. Prices are up during this administration. There has been inflation every month of this administration. Moreover, the pace of inflation has accelerated now for 5 consecutive months. It hit 3% in September, so prices in September were 3% higher than they were a year prior, and they were 1.7% higher than they were in January, the month that President Trump returned to office. Now, he keeps saying that every single price is down. I think the overall numbers show that is clearly not true, and I think Americans know that. If you look at the CPI, Consumer Price Index data, it'll show you that thousands of individual products have increased in price since President Trump returned to the White House.
Here's what he said about grocery store price.
Beef we have to get down, but we've got prices way down.
You think prices are coming down from this?
I believe that, yeah. I think they're coming down, but I think they're down already.
Our groceries are way down. Everything is way down. And the press doesn't report it. The press reports whatever the con people say. You know, I call the Democrats con men and women. They make up numbers.
Just to be clear, Daniel, what are grocery prices like, and are these numbers made up?
They are made up, Boris. So grocery prices as well are up since President Trump returned to office. They were up 1.4% since January. They're up 2.7% compared to a year prior. Grocery prices are up in 5 of the 6 overarching categories of products that are tracked by the Consumer Price Index. President Trump keeps saying it's only beef that's up. Yes, beef has experienced one of the biggest increases, but it's far from only beef. Again, far more products in the grocery aisle have increased than decreased. Other big risers include coffee and bananas, 2 products that are heavily imported in the U.S. and thus are subject to President Trump's major tariffs on those items.
Yeah, the president also frequently touts energy prices as going down. What does the cost of gas look like?
Yeah, so he said 2 things last week on this subject that weren't true either. So he said that gas is just a bit above $2. The national average is above $3. It's about a $3.07, $3.08 at this moment. Second of all, he said that gas prices have plummeted to the lowest level in 2 decades. First of all, they haven't plummeted. As of today, they are just about identical to what they were a year ago today, about $3.08 according to AAA. Maybe they've increased a fraction of a cent if you go to multiple decimal places, but at least near identical. And second, it's clearly not the lowest in 2 decades. Not only was it lower during, of course, the COVID pandemic when demand crashed, not only was it lower at various points in the 2010s and the 2000s, it was also lower on various days this year in January under President Biden. So both parts of that claim just not true, just like most of President Trump's claims about prices these days are just not true either.
Daniel Dale, thank you so much for watching.
And as I explained, a lot of the American companies have eaten a good portion of the tariffs, but now they're starting to pass those costs down, which they normally would at the very beginning, but because of bullying by Trump, they did not. So that's what's happening. There you go.